All right. So everybody smile now. There you go. Okay, let's recite the blessing for study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher shanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu lasok b'divrei Torah. All right. Okay. All right, so we are the beginning of the Torah. Which reminds me, I'm just getting myself a note. I will. Okay, thank you for your patience. Okay, any questions about the end of the Torah, beginning of the Torah, in terms of this? Simchat Torah. When we began, when we ended, we began. Any technical, any questions of interest that you have? Yeah, Eileen.
Why are there two versions of the Garden of Eden?
There's two versions of creation, one version of the Garden of Eden, I believe. Is that what you're?
Yeah. And who decided which one to put in?
Well, they're both in there. That's part of the interesting part, right? So the academic theory, right? JEPD, right? The synthesis of four different traditions that define the Torah later. That one is the E and one is the J tradition. E Elohim, J being Yahweh, and that both those traditions were brought in together. Now, the rabbis, of course, I think are going to have to look at it and go like, well, wait a minute. We don't buy JEPD, and Rashi didn't know about JEPD, and they believed it to all be a divine document. So how did they resolve it? They said that it is a question, an issue of klal ufrat, which means a generalization and then specific. And so what they say is, so by the way, you have to remember, and this is a beautiful thing, Rabbi Akiva, and by the way, how many of you have read that book I recommended by Yochi Brand? Sorry, the Orchard by Yochi Brandis. Did any of you end up reading that?
I think I read it.
Yeah, it's a very thick book. Steve, did you enjoy it or no? Oh, you didn't read it.
I think I read it and didn't like it.
I think you're right, Eileen. I recall, I think I recommended it. I think you did not like it. It is, to me, probably the greatest insight of rabbinic times in the post-destruction period of understanding Hillel and Shammai and Rabbi Akiva and all of how rabbinic Judaism evolves. It's a very thick book. She is like a scholar in terms of the sources. It's all from the Talmud and from historical pieces. It's called, again, The Orchard. And Rabbi Akiva, in a desire to be able to talk about, exegesis, interpretation, in order to legitimize interpretation of Torah, had to come up with principles of how, Eileen, clear principles of how you can interpret Torah. Right? You can do it this way and this way, 13 ways, you can do it. Anything else you can't, but these are like the permitted ways. So one of them is to understand the Torah as sometimes beginning with a generalization and then describing a specific. So what they say is that the first chapter is the generalized view of creation, and the second one is how it particularly happened, like the specific. Because Eileen, by the way, the second one contradicts the first one. Right? In the first one, you have animals created, then human is the pinnacle, the end. Right. The second version is Adam's created first, and then the animals, and then finally Eve. So that the rabbis have to, their concern, Eileen, is how to harmonize that potential conflict. Did I see a hand? Did I see somebody? No? Okay. That wasn't a little question. That was a big question, but it was a great question to set the stage. All right. Why don't we go to the material? Okay, and this is, those of you who have studied with me know about Nechama Leibowitz. I love Nechama Leibowitz, who was an educator, 20th century, and she was just a magnificent Bible scholar and teacher. Her books on this, in rabbinical school, we actually use this in our first year class. So it's not always. By the way, if I'm glitching a little bit, I apologize. We're trying to, believe it or not, I'm actually, Steve, on my Ethernet cable. This isn't Wi-Fi. And so I don't know if I shared with you when I saw you. I think they have to replace actually the cable to update them, so they're not having this problem. So my apologies. So Nechama Leibowitz, 20th century educator, just brilliant. Sometimes her readings, as you've done it with me, are a little bit easier to understand. Sometimes they're a little bit intellectual, like a little bit heavy, but we'll try and take it apart and try to understand it. So let's, Lisa, are you in the mood to read? You can always, if I call on you, you can always decline, by the way. You can always feel comfortable.
That's fine.
Is it big enough? You want me to make it even bigger for you?
I can get closer. It's okay. So from the top?
Correct, yes.
The tree of knowledge. Some of our commentators and authorities reject the allegorizing of the biblical narrative as dangerous.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to suggest, by the way, Lisa. Whenever we read the Nechama Leibowitz, we have to read it slowly. Because what's going to happen is I know it's going to happen. You're going to get through the next sentence and your brain's going to say, I don't understand a word that I'm reading. So, and everybody else is going to be that guy. So start again, just slow and deliberate, just so we can, because it's not easy stuff to understand, okay?
Okay, I'll see if I can bring the anxiety level down a little bit.
The anxiety of reading?
Yes.
I'll call on someone else if you like.
No, it's good for me.
Okay,
I'm growing.
All right, just slow, just find that zen.
Okay. Some of our commentators and authorities reject the allegorizing of the
allegory, right? The use of allegory, which is seen as seeing something not being literal, but as having hidden meaning and providing moral, right? A moral or deeper understanding, and meant not to be taken literally. Go ahead.
Of the biblical narrative is dangerous. Others enthusiastically embrace this approach, and there are those who take the middle way. But
of course, right? Right. Hold on, Lisa. That's the Jewish way. Yes, no, and maybe. Right. So there's some who like using allegory, and we're going to find those out. Abravanel and Rambam, and there's others who are opposed to it. Right. Abravanel, Bachya, and others, and then there's in the middle, like some who will use it a little bit. All right. Go ahead.
But even those who tend to reject it or reduce their employment of it to the minimum, like Ibn Ezra, who devotes a large part of his introduction to his Torah commentary to attacking the allegorists. Allegorists, chiefly aimed at Christian controversialists who wished thereby to justify their repudiation of the law in favor of faith in the articles of their creed. Admit that it is the allegorical hidden meaning of the story of the Garden of Eden and tree of knowledge that we must seek.
All right, so Ibn Ezra in his time is disputing, Lisa, the allegorical method because it's being used by Christians to negate the serious literal significance of the entire Torah. Right? Everything is allegory. By the way, according to Christians, what part of the Jewish Bible is binding? Only one part.
Must be the Ten Commandments.
Why? Because according to them, they said that was the only thing shared directly from God to the people. Everything else was through the intermediary of Moses, and so nothing else is absolutely binding. So that's what. So even Ibn Ezra, who didn't like, who didn't want people to look at the Bible as allegory, said that the Garden of Eden, that's the only way to understand it, right? And so we'll get into why. All right. Any questions? Any clarification? All right, keep going, Lisa. One more paragraph.
I got to admit, I've always grappled with how much of it is literal and how much isn't of the Torah. It's been a huge issue with me.
No. So by the way, so this is going to be, you're going to love today, I hope. I always wonder, sometimes, Lisa, we haven't said a lot together, but the rest who have, like, sometimes I go like, I love this session today. I don't know if they're going to like it or if they're going to get it or what it's going to mean, but this is the essence of how we understand Torah, because the question, do we take it literally or not? And we'll get into the specific question, Lisa, about free will and the serious question that the story narrative has about like the human condition of free will. So it's more than just like, is it literal or not? This actually relates to the nature of the human being. All right, so good. I'm glad. Hopefully we'll learn together. Go ahead, one more paragraph.
But the allegorical interpretations given are various. We shall devote our studies this time to the approach of
It's
Abravanel.
pronounced Abravanel. By the way, there's different ways to some traditions will do it Abarbanel, some will do it Abravanel, but go ahead.
Abravanel, who dwells at length on this subject. He questions not merely the nature of the tree of knowledge, but the reason for the prohibition.
All right, hold on a second, because I actually pulled up Abravanel is an amazing character. From the middle, like of the 1400s, somewhere like 1440s born, I think, and through the end of the 1400s, and he dies at the beginning, like 1508, and he's in Portugal and Spain. So what's happening in Portugal and Spain during that time?
Expulsion. Yeah.
The Inquisition and expulsion eventually. So he's remarkable. He is, hold on, let me see if I can find here some of it. Because he's a statesman, and this will become relevant later on, that he, hold on, where is it? Under, not exegesis, what's that, should be under his personal life. Here we go, hold on. He used his high position, great wealth he inherited from his father to aid his co-religionists. When his patron Alfonso captured the city of Arzila in Morocco, Jewish captives faced being sold. He contributed funds to do it. He held office. He was a statesman within Portugal, and then, by the way, escaped to Spain because things were worse in Portugal at that time, and then went to Spain. And so he comes as a statesman. That is going to become relevant later on as part of this reading today. So now this is Abravanel. Now you know a little bit about who he is, Lisa. Just read this paragraph.
For the divine goodwill will not prevent man from attaining perfection, since God will not withhold the good from those who walk in purity. The knowledge of good and evil is the perfection of man. How then could God have intended to withhold it from him? If it is maintained that the eating of the tree did harm because it involved the knowing of evil, surely it was at the same time beneficial in involving the knowledge of good. Why then did he prohibit the good on account of the evil?
What question is Abravanel trying to address about human nature and about good and evil? George?
Yeah, I got a whole theory on this one.
Well, let's zone in if we can.
Okay, he's talking about free will. You know, animals supposedly don't have any free will. You know, it's their nature to do whatever, and man has the ability to be good or bad or whatever. He can make choices.
So, George, he's going a little even deeper. If he's saying, if knowledge of good and evil is the fulfillment of the human condition, why would God withhold the knowledge of good and evil when he created humans? That's the question.
Okay, I might want to go around that a little bit.
Go ahead.
If we're supposed to be, you know, looking to Hashem for all the answers, et cetera, you know, as our tradition says, I went to Columbia, okay? And we see what's going on many of these campuses. And, you know, they're totally secular. And by reason, which should be good, they come up with ridiculous conclusions. You know, many of them are evil because they think they understand all this, but they really don't.
Okay, therefore?
You know, their logic leads them to, you know, Mishigas. Right.
But George, the question is, why would God, and I hear what you're saying, I'm not sure it addresses the question of why, if good, the knowledge of good and evil is essential to the human condition, why would God withhold that? If the assumption is, and Mort, I'm going to get to Mort's answer, to Mort's comment in a moment, if the tree of knowledge is about giving, about good and evil, and about the attainment of it, right? Why would God go through that process to give good and evil knowledge to man? Because he should have given it to him at the beginning. So, George, hold on to it for a moment, because I appreciate your comment. It's a little bit more complicated. I don't want to spend too much time. I want to finish all these stories. I want to give Mort a chance. Go ahead.
Whether God would give it to man maybe what God is saying is that it's not inherent, that man has to learn through his experiences what the difference is.
Okay, so so you're already like getting an answer to the question. All right. And in terms of, it's always important first to understand the question, right? The question is, why would God withhold it? So you're providing an answer that good and evil requires experience.
And God isn't withholding it. God is acknowledging that the human being has to, through his experience, learn the difference.
So, Mort, let me ask you then, in your interpretation of the story, you're taking an allegorical approach?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. All right, so I want to just right. So that's a way, you're not taking it literally because you're trying to reconcile the very question that is being asked. And I like it. I'm very close to you, Mort, by the way. So let's go on to Jackie or Yigal or whoever's asking.
So the tree was there from the beginning, right? And then the commandment was given not to partake of it. So from my perspective, you've got, allegorically speaking, you've got Adam and Eve that are blissfully ignorant, and it finally dawned on them that they finally evolved to the point to not obey, to have that free will, and hence have that gift of knowledge of good and evil. Maybe.
So here's, I'm going to make it more complicated, Jackie. If they didn't know the difference between good and evil, how could God have given them a command? Right? If they were automaton, right? How could God give them a commandment if they didn't know good from evil? Does that question make sense?
Well, yeah, but I mean, if you think about kids, right, when they're little, you sit there and say, I remember my sister lived in a mammoth and they had a wood stove. And it was always, don't touch the stove. It's hot. It's a hot stove. And the kids didn't understand that it was hot until they actually touched it. And then we're like, oh, it's hot. So it wasn't that they didn't know it was wrong, but they didn't understand that it was actually there as a form of protection.
So I think similar to where, to where Mort was, that the tree was an important experiential part of their evolving good and the knowledge of good and evil. Let's go. Stan, hold on for a moment. With apologies, I want to get back to sources. I want to make sure that we get through them because there are going to be lots of different opinions here. But Stan, why don't you continue reading the answer, of course.
I'd rather not read.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Marilyn, are you up for reading? Or no, you don't have to. You can always turn me down.
No,
Oh.
I can't read today.
Okay,
So-
that's fine. That's fine. Good, because Rob's going to read then.
Bob is going to read. The answer, of course, lies in defining the difference between the character of the knowledge of good and evil before the eating and after.
All right, so hold on. So Jackie, right? What's the difference from before to after then? Okay, good. Go ahead.
Both Rambam and Abravanel agree that it would be inconceivable to explain that the eating of the tree of knowledge implied the achievement of free will and the capacity of intellectual discernment. For man, the product of God's own fashioning, created in his image, could not possibly have lacked this consciousness.
Okay, period for a second, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Jackie and Mort, the more literals want to say, like, they couldn't have lacked this knowledge from good and evil. Right? It's just not possible because, by the way, why? Because they're made in the image of God. Right? We know that from the text. So what does it mean? Part of that divine knowledge is the difference between good and evil. But we're gonna go through a number of hoops before we get to the conclusion, or some discussion of reconciliation. Keep going, Rob, please.
Here is how Abravanel presents his case in taking issue with Rambam.
Okay, now it's important to understand, Rob, I know you know the difference between Rambam, Maimonides, and Ramban, Nachmanides.
Yes.
But not for everybody who doesn't. Rambam is a generation before Ramban, Nachmanides. and they're very different in their approaches. Rambam is much more allegorical. Ramban is not. Ramban is a literalist by and large. He spends his life really trying to reconcile the potential contradictions of the Torah, and he's a fascinating character. So go ahead, Rob.
As our sages expounded the text, behold, it, creation, was good. This refers to the good inclination vary to the evil inclination. In other words, the whole perfection of man lay in his possession of the capacity to choose freely between evil and good. Otherwise, he would not have been human, and God could not have commanded him, from all the trees of the garden you may eat, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you may not eat thereof, since a command can only apply to one who possesses a free choice and will.
Okay. Sure. So, by the way, so taking up a little bit of what I said, Rob, right, about like they had to have had this knowledge because they're made in the image of God. But what is their proof text? Hold on. It is, I was looking at a couple different sections here before, and I want to say it's 131, chapter 131. Yeah. All right. And God saw all they had made and found it, right, Rob, they quoted, they're very good, right? Mm-hmm. And there was evening, there was morning, the sixth day. So Tov Ma'od is here in the text. So Rob, the Tov is good, right? The Me'od is the evil. That good and evil existed at the very beginning of creation. And they're using this, Rob, the rabbis love to have a proof text. Like, it's fine to say the good was there, but where are you going to find that proof that it's there? Okay. Every rabbi loves a great, proof text. Let's go on. Any questions or comments about that, or we're going to build up a little bit more? Mort, is there something?
Yeah. Did anybody ask the question, how would man have developed had he never eaten of that tree?
Right. So that is essential.
Won't that give us the answer? Isn't that relevant to where we're going and the effect of having eaten of that tree? You have to ask the opposite as well.
Correct. And so they want to assume, when I say they, most commentators, Mort, that the ideal condition of the human being was one of free will, and that's why they had to leave the garden. Right? It was an act of free will, if you will, even though it appears to be punishment.
So if they had not eaten of the tree, they just would have remained within the garden forever?
No, they don't want to see that. That's their challenge. I mean, if they hadn't eaten of the tree, would they have been just automatons, right, without any sense of free will? And the answer is no, that they had free will from the beginning, and this is just part of their evolution. So what would have happened if they hadn't eaten is not, I don't know of any source that really talks about that. Is it right, Mark? That's the right question. Jackie.
So like any good story writer, right? There's a backstory, there's the thing that's happened, and then there's an impetus, and then there's this story. So that's really, to me, the eating of the fruit of the tree of good and evil is the impetus for the rest of the human story. That what came before, you don't really hear about what happened before, that they were existing there, that they were doing whatever. That's the boring backstory that nobody really knows about.
Yeah,
but
it's a great comment.
From there.
Right. And by the way, that's the nature of literature, right, Jackie? We don't consider that offshoot. And yeah, I thank you, because it is important. I always tell people that you have to look at the Torah as ultimately a literary document, and that's its ultimate, its final structure. So thank you. Rob, why don't you continue?
Accordingly, the knowledge of good and evil achieved by man after his sin could not have been synonymous with free choice or as Ramban words it, the capacity to differentiate between good and evil. He states, the intelligence with which God has endowed man, that is his ultimate perfection, was his before his rebellion. That was implied in the phrase, in the image and likeness of God, on account of this. He spoke with and commanded him, as it is stated, and Lord God commanded to man. A command is not given to animals or to one lacking intelligence. With his intellectual faculty, man differentiates between truth and falsehood, and this was possessed by him in his pristine perfection and purity.
All right. So Jackie, in this image, right? If you have kids around a house, by the way, you don't tell them, right, young kids, don't play with that and expect them to listen or touch it. You actually put it out of their reach, right? Because they don't know. And so this, right, this idea of being, philosophy is stating that God wouldn't have given a command unless they had the intellectual capacity to be able to, to obey it. And so therefore, they had to have known the difference between good and evil. Rambam, again, is all about knowledge in terms of God and the perfection of humanity, of the individual as well. Stan.
Well, I think that there's an analogy between wild animals and domesticated animals. They both have free will, but they're made their choices based on basically knowledge. We can say that humans had free will and make their choices based on the knowledge of their life, or the knowledge of what they read, or the knowledge of everything else.
Okay. Yeah, I understand the distinction you're making, but again, we don't expect animals to be able, even though have a high intelligence, right? Any of you have animals. I have animals that certainly do not listen. I keep telling one dog, please do not pee on the floor. Right? She's not listening to me. I tell her every day, please do not. And for some reason, she is not listening to me. So, right, Steve, go ahead.
But some dogs are trainable. So to say animals lack understanding and don't respond to training is not so. So I mean, certainly there are inborn behaviors that we see and judgments that we see. So
remember, animals by and large, look, I believe in the intelligence of animals, but generally are motivated by positive or negative reinforcement.
True.
Right. By the way, my son has a dog up in Seattle that'll ring the doorbell. He lives in a condo, rings the bell on the door to let them know to let him out. Right? Because the dog knows, right? If she pees in the house, she'll be punished. If she goes outside, she's going to be rewarded. So is she doing it because she's commanded? No, it's the reinforcement of that ritual, the Pavlovian response. But Steve, dogs can be many animals can be trained, but it's a different faculty of knowledge and brain and so forth. So I don't want to diminish. I would never diminish animals, by the way. I'm an animal lover. So let's make that clear. I will not disparage any animals on the show. Jackie.
So when you were saying that with young children, they can't understand, so you put the things out of your reach. That brought a personal story. When my son, who's now 28, was a toddler, if he was using a toy in a way that was harmful, to either to something in the house or to his sister, etc., or they couldn't share it, the thing went to toy jail. So toy jail was a shelf in the closet, right? It was totally out of reach. He couldn't get to it. The very first time I had my mother babysit, she turned to my son and said, "What would you like to do?" She didn't know about toy jail. He wanted all the things in toy jail. So this idea that you put it out of reach, and they freaking want it even more. They want it. And I came back. I remember coming home, and I'm looking at the floor. I'm like, "There's all these toys. They were all in toy jail. What happened?" She told me that little stinker. So yeah,
that is crazy. By the way, I'm just getting texts from these Israeli groups, and El Al is flying flights out of JFK and Newark. Right, they're taking back soldiers, reservists who are being called up from the States, both who are Israeli-born and those who are American-born, and have, by the way, have moved back. The flights are all full. Hard to get a reservation on them right now. right? So all the people who are trying to like, this is what's like, kind of blowing up my phone. Steve.
I just wanted to refer, I watched the first segment of 60 Minutes on Sunday, who had an expert in artificial intelligence. So even machines, we are creating intelligent machines, so concerning that they might take over the world. So how does that play within the context of knowledge of good and evil? It's very, I highly recommend that segment.
Look, the Terminator, series is highly prescient in terms of, right, artificial intelligence being able to act upon itself. And I do look. The Isaac Asimov wrote about all this. And I remember, like recently, I saw a replay, caught part of it, of interview, the movie I, Robot, right? In which that's the question, right? If the benefit of humanity is to diminish their free will, Steve, could the machines limit our free will in order to save the species? And in many ways, I think you would agree that the machines are probably smarter than us in terms of
listening to a true world expert in artificial intelligence got me thinking about, because previous to that show, I didn't think it was going to happen, but he convinced me. I have real experience in developing neural networks, and I at the time I thought they could be very powerful, but never conceived that they could outstrip humanity. This guy thinks they will, and he's worried. So
look, when a machine, a computer, I've talked about this, right? In terms of when a machine and computer can consider a million possibilities, right, within a microsecond, and decide based on the outcome of the best possible choice, where humans can't even possibly consider all those, then yes, there is it's a major issue. Anyway, Bruce, are you up for reading?
Sure.
Sure, come on, Bruce.
Okay. Let me get my glasses. Where are we?
The knowledge gained by him.
The knowledge he gained through eating, or the tendency.
No, but the knowledge gained by him, according to Bravenel.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
The knowledge gained by him, according to Averell.
Bravenel.
After eating the fruit of the tree, was of a much lower order.
Right. So it wasn't between good and evil. It was a lower order. Bruce, what was it? Go ahead.
Previously, his intellect, both practical and theoretical, was perfect, but his knowledge of good and evil was, of necessity, intellectual, pure, and not applied or prompted by worldly motives.
Right. So he had much, I think, Jackie, where you were in your brain, where you're thinking, Bruce, man had the theoretical idea, construct of good and evil, but it never had been in a practical situation of where it was applied. And this was simply now the application of it, which according to this, Bruce, is a much lower level. It's not really knowing it. It's just now acting upon it. Because desire, Bruce, by the way, is what motivated that. Right? George, you want to add in here?
Yeah, it's easy to be good when there's no temptation. That's when you become bad, when there's something, that you shouldn't be doing, whatever.
Correct. And I think that here, what I imagine, George, is if I'm going to really, allegorize this, right? George, is I'm imagining, Adam and Eve, there and going like, oh, wait a minute, what is this? Like, why do I want it? Like, I'm feeling something I've never felt before. Like, what is it? Like, right? It's a new emotion. And then they knew it, but they never experienced the emotion of it and what it meant. Does that make sense? That's how I imagine it. All right, Bruce, keep going. The knowledge he gained.
The knowledge he gained through eating, or the tendencies which were then strengthened in him, stood, according to Averell, in opposition to nature, and they consisted of the conventions and the values created and fabricated by man. Illusionary values, preoccupation with which results in the forfeiting of eternal ones.
So here, Bruce, getting into this idea of, right, that all of a sudden, in opposition to nature, right, we're now being human being, and this new awareness is being tempted by nature to forego the spiritual. Right? Their environment is now drawing them in ways that they didn't have in the theoretical knowledge of good and evil. That's why this is getting kind of heavy, right, Lisa? Like when I read this, I go like, this might be a little bit too deep for the group, but we're going to try and pull it out here. So let's keep going. I'll try. If it's a little bit confusing, you're in the right place, so don't worry. And we'll try and tie it together. It'll be a little clearer in a couple minutes, I hope, or it's just more confusing. So go ahead, Bruce.
Abravanel digresses into a tirade against civilization. Human world of human.
Hold on. Human inventions.
Oh, good. Goes the other way. Okay, no
Yeah.
problem. Human inventions and man's disforcement from the natural path mapped out for him by his creator.
All right. So now we're going to get either a little bit clarity or just more confused. We'll see which way you guys go. But let's have, I'm going to have someone who wants to read, who hasn't.
Small print.
No, you were great. I want to give everybody a chance.
That's okay. That's fine.
Linda, are you up for reading?
Could you make to start the underlying?
Yeah, the underlying. Hold on. I'll make it a little bit bigger for you. There you go.
That's better. The underlining intention of the chapter is to stress that God created man in his intellectual image, by which he was prompted to strive to perfect his soul in the acknowledgement of his creator and imitation of his wisdom. For the perfection of the image lies in its closest approximation to the form impressed on it.
Right. So humans are made in the image of God.
Okay.
And so our goal is to become, Linda, as godlike as possible. All right. And that's why we created with the intelligence to be able to pursue that, to strive for the perfection of the soul. And that's how we acknowledge God. All right. Keep going.
God also made available all the things necessary for human existence, food and drink of the fruits of the garden, which he planted, and the waters of its rivers. All this was in its natural state, requiring no labor or toil or human exertion. All was at his disposal, so that he need not burden himself in satisfying his bodily needs, but could concentrate on the perfection of his soul, for which purpose he was created. On this account, God commanded him to rest content with the natural things he had furnished him with, and not be attracted to luxuries which require resort to human artifice and worldly things, so that his intellect should not be diverted to the assuring of physical comforts, which is the reverse of the spiritual perfection that is the ultimate sin.
All right. So here, Mort, the garden represents the potential spiritual interaction of humans with God without the distractions of and temptations of the world, to be able to be and to imitate God. Everything's provided for them. Food, what, they don't have to toil for anything. So as allegory, Mort, like, we're here to live in God's world, not to be in the garden. And that then is the tension, right? Lisa, here's that tension. How do we, right? And what Abravanel is going to argue is living in the world, in the real world, actually diminishes our connection to God. Like, that's going to be what, and that's where good and evil is going to come about as well. So it's really, Jackie, you have a comment?
Yeah, so coming back to that literary comparison, again, what Mort was asking about, why doesn't anyone ask about basically the backstory, is, looking at this, it's like, oh, okay, so that's nice, that's nice, that's nice. But it's ultimately boring, right? The conflict is what makes the story interesting, the overcoming the challenges, the seeing what's going to come next. One of my friends said she was writing a utopian game where everyone got along and everyone's needs were taken care of, so they could just deal with spiritual matters, that kind of thing. It's like what you're describing here. And another one of my friends goes, wow, that sounds like the most boring video game ever invented.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that that's exactly the struggle, Jackie, right? Like, even though the purest state, it's like there's two different possible worlds. The one purely with God in the garden, but the dangers of being outside the garden and how it leads you away. Remind me, I don't know why I thought about it, Jackie, that it's a famous quote, right? That courage is not the absence of fear, but rather it's acting in the face of. Right. So, and I let's go on, because I know more, you have a hand up, but I want to continue it because I want to get through a couple of sources. We have 12 minutes left. Linda, please continue.
Meaning of the decree and command: of all the trees of the garden you may certainly eat, was, I do not forbid you the things essential for your bodily sustenance from the trees of the garden and the tree of life, but you may not actually eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, by which is meant the indulgence in and study of worldly things. What is the good that should be pursued and the evil to be avoided, though you may look upon it and touch it, which is a minimal indulgence, just so much as is absolutely necessary. Eating here implies the sustenance of the body from that food and the indulgence in it, and that the food ingested becomes identical with the body that absorbs it. From this, only spiritual death can ensue. Preoccupied with the tree of knowledge, you will become divorced from the tree of life, which is synonymous with death.
Okay. So eating of a tree represents the separation, Linda, from God, right? It is the distancing from God, and the death becomes allegorical, like metaphoric as well. To be estranged is, from God is to be dead, if you will. And that's the death. Now, they're going to find a proof verse here, Linda, from Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 15, that's going to use as parallels life and good, death and evil. So go ahead, read that quote.
To this, the following text alludes. See, I have placed before you today life and good, death and evil. Therefore, choose life.
Right. Linda, isn't that a nice proof text, actually?
Yes.
Right, because it parallels good and evil with life and death. And here in the pursuit, like in terms of, obligations toward God. We're a little bit behind, as when we have a difficult source, this almost always happens. But I want to find, so here, in the end, so here's what's going to happen. When Abravanel, very suspicious about the outside world, you can imagine, based on his experiences in Portugal and in Spain, right? Like the world is a really challenging place to live, and challenges your belief in God. He sees the story of Cain and Abel, Cain and being connected to the land as being negative, is the consuming of things, and Abel being of a higher level of just the keeper of sheep.
Hmm.
All right. I know, George. I know it could be a stretch.
Well, I thought it was because Abel gave the choices.
Well, so you know what, George, I'm gonna let you read this one. Actually, go ahead. Abel was a keeper of sheep. Can you read it?
Yeah. Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain was a tiller of the ground. Cain adopted the vocation of tilling the ground because he feared not God and ignored the curse of "cursed be the ground for your sake," which was addressed to Adam, pursuing material things and accumulation of possessions. Symbolized in his name Cain, which comes from the Hebrew root meaning acquisition. Abel, however, proud-hearted, who pursued illusory honor and lordship because of the keeper of sheep. For this reason is called Abel, which means vanity, which is, which means also nothingness,
Correct. It's not as good.
Yeah.
It's not as bad. Right.
Yeah,
exactly, George.
Okay.
It's, by the way, so here's where we're going to get to. Hold on. Here is, let's go. Steve, will you continue? Abel's offering.
Abel's offering was no better than Cain's, except in the fact that God observed the former's intellectual superiority, since leadership and honor are the product of the intellect.
So, by the way, George, this is contrary to what you and I normally associated, is that Abel actually brought up, right, the choicest.
So the choices, yeah.
Right, and this is saying no, it has nothing to do with that. It's how Abel came to the sacrifice himself. It wasn't what he sacrificed, but that's a different, right? And obviously he's trying to create, this is specifically related to about knowledge and good and evil. So that's why they've taken a twist here. Keep going, Steve.
Honor saves man from ignoble qualities. Abel was noble in character, a prince and judge over his work, whereas Cain was a tiller of the ground, akin to the earth, which God had cursed, seeking out material labor, becoming a slave to the ground and animal possessions, and not a ruler over them. Possessions unaccompanied by honor is the cause of all ignobleness, since he who seeks wealth and
hold on,
cares not for honor will be led into robbery and other undesirable activities. Abel was superior to Cain in the nature of his occupation. Cain was occupied with artificial pursuits, for the daily plowing of the farmer to sow opens up and robs his soil. Abel conducted his life according to nature without artificial labor. Cain was concerned over his wealth, oblivious to prestige. Abel looked upward, and therefore God accepted his offering, which was born from the living, according to nature, subject to no artificial tampering. But he did not favor Cain's offering, which was the product of human artifice.
All right. So clearly here, Abel is better than Cain, except now, Eileen, I want you to read, because the next part gets even more interesting. Abel, however,
was not perfect in everything, since he preferred the conventions of political life above spiritual contemplation. It was Seth who realized the true ideal.
Oh, so by the way, who's Seth?
Another kid.
Three.
All right, it's another kid. So by the way, so Eileen, this is an interesting part, right? They elevated Abel above Cain in terms of those two, but said Abel was also, right, George, here is your concern. Like, really? Like, how is that an elevated thing about, even being a shepherd?
But killing something living, I would think, is worse than planting in the ground.
Yeah, but it's in this way, the way that's understood by Bravanel previously is, and it is confusing, Eileen, so I'll try and clarify a little bit, is the ground had been cursed by God.
So why would God, okay.
No, let's not go there though. I can't do the why.
I figured as much.
Sorry.
Why curse the ground? He made it.
No. So let's just understand it as is. Eileen, it's a great question, but it's going to take me. But so hold on. So the ground is cursed. Abel is trying to conquer that. Cain, rather. Abel, by the way, as a shepherd, the symbolism is that he's a ruler over people. That equals the politics of the world. Ruling things, ruling animals, ruling like political society. So let's read about Seth now. Go ahead.
And Adam knew his wife, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. Adam knew that Seth would not emulate the prestige-seeking Abel or the acquisitive Cain, but would be in his image and likeness, attracted to true spiritual perfection. He therefore called him Seth, since he saw the world could be firmly founded. Seth means foundation through him.
Yeah, Rabbi?
But
You
never hear about this. You never hear anything about Seth.
No, you don't. That's
So he didn't do anything.
Good, except, by the way, who is Noah a descendant of? Cain, Abel, or Seth?
I don't know.
Must be Seth.
It is Seth, Steve.
Okay, my question is,
Go ahead, George.
I know at first mankind was not permitted to eat meat. Now, when did this happen? I mean, why would you be a shepherd if they're not meat eaters? I mean,
By the way, you still gain milk from sheep. You still gain wool from sheep. You still exactly.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So let's go on. Hold on. Okay, so here, Professor Bauer, who wrote about Abravanel, here's where his background becomes really interesting. And Nancy, do you want to read here the his in this paragraph? And this is he's a 20th century scholar, Bauer, and the his is Abravanel. So go ahead.
You don't have it up on the screen.
I do not. You are correct. It's on my screen. It's not on yours, huh? I can see it perfectly. Go ahead. His hatred.
Okay, his hatred of civilization and politics is not accidental, but firmly entrenched. He found support for this from the rabbinic dictum Pirkei Avot: hate public office and do not be familiar with authority.
Which is interesting because Abravanel, Nancy, was very involved in public office, and yet what he's saying is, don't do it. Why? You're gonna find out. Go ahead.
Okay, man should avoid all forms of public office. Failure to do so would involve the holder in violation of all 10 commandments. Let a man rather live in retirement and live on the labor of his hands. Many of our sages were therefore artisans. How apt are Solomon's words: be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks and look well to thy herds, rather than to matters of state. When you want a garment, do something.
Oh, so hold on, let me move it.
Do not go to the shopkeeper in town to buy from him, but make from wool of your sheep in your own home. Public office in the town is full of contention, but the righteous are secure as a young lion, dwelling in the country in which his sheep, from Abravanel's commentary to Pirkei Avot. The political and social order were established contrary to nature and the will of God. The state and society were products of the evil inclination, and the Torah only allowed the Jewish people to lead a political and social existence in deference to human frailty, just as in the case of the captive woman whose Israelite was allowed to marry as a lesser
evil. So, yeah. Lisa, what's Abravanel's view of society and humanity and everything?
Not taking everything literal.
No, well, so by the way, he doesn't want to take the story literally, but his view is like society is horrible, right? It is like, pardon the Antichrist, right? Like society is horrible. And by the way, to be a leader of society, like you're going to be the worst of the worst. You're going to end up violating all 10 commandments if you're going to be a leader, a politician.
So that would go for a rabbi.
I think they're talking about
according to what he's saying.
No, he's saying political. He's actually distinguishing political and social leaders. When
a rabbi is a social leader.
I'm not determining public policy.
I understand, but this makes no sense what he's putting here. It's all bitterness.
It is, by the way, but that comes from his personal experience. That's why it's right. His personal experience. And by the way, look how many politicians, even now, right, are like people like are on the wrong road. Right, the great senators have now been accused of accepting bribes. It is so, Eileen. And here's where Lisa come back now, and I'll try and tie it together. The garden becomes, and it's eating of it is the allegory of the perfect spiritual relationship with God versus outside the garden, which is society and the evils of society. And it's a horrible place to be. And the Jewish people are only able to exist there because God provided us an antidote to exist kind of in the worst possible conditions. He was very bitter about society, Lisa. You can imagine that because what he saw from Portugal to Spain, there's a story that he actually tried to bribe the king of Spain, Alfonso, by the way, not to expel, this one you'll like, Mort, not to expel the Jews.
Yeah.
He apparently offered like 600,000 ducats or something like some extraordinary amount, but it was the what is his name, Torquemada, the inquisitor, who actually made the king reject the bribe. Yeah, it's so in the end, by the way, Nahama Leibowitz is going to say that the eating of the tree is not about gaining knowledge, but it was all simply about whether you're going to obey God's will or not. Okay, Lisa, this is, many people, like commentators here, are very clear to say, like, let's not take this story literally. Let's take it allegorically, and we're going to try and learn what is it trying to teach us about relationship to God and about society. And it's more than just a cute story, but it's about free will and nature and the challenge of living a good life in the world outside the garden.
And
So,
also, isn't it saying if we all take care of ourselves properly and do good and not evil, we technically shouldn't need leaders, the state leaders and everything. If we all did what we're supposed to do to make a wonderful society, we shouldn't need someone to tell us that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's such a great idealistic, of the human being, and many commentators are suspicious of human nature.
Yeah.
And even Lisa, like the Yetzirah Tov, Yetzirah Ra, we have good inclination, we have evil inclination. But even the Torah, by the way, some of you know this, right? Would it have been better if God had not created humans or not, in terms of creating society? By the way, Lisa, another story about society is about the Tower of Babel, which is going to come up. Right? When people, that's really right, if you will, anti-urban living. Right? If you're living people together, you're going to do evil. So you need to spread out. So, Mark, what were you going to add? I'll give you last comment.
It seems to me it's God's plan that man should go out, because God could have prevented man from ever eating from the tree of knowledge. So his plan all along was that man should go and leave the garden and go out into the world.
Yeah. Yes, I that's how I look at it. I think that's part of the allegorical, right, interpretation. There's a piece, if you want to look at the whole piece, we didn't have a chance to look at everything. There's actually a proof in here that talks about that until they eat of the fruit of the tree, by the way, it's not called the tree of knowledge of good and evil. At the command given by God and repeated by Eve, it says, just don't eat of the tree in the middle of the garden. Steve, it's only after they eat that it's called the tree of good and evil.
Oh.
Isn't that interesting? It wasn't about good and evil, but it's only after they ate of it, right? It was simply a command not to eat from that tree. They didn't know what it was about. And then ultimately, it's about the human condition, whether we will, I think, Lisa, that you're kind of challenging, whether we're going to listen to God or not. All right? It was a pleasure to study with you all, as always.
Interesting.
All right, this is a good one. We'll continue on. I wish you all the best, and may our prayers for Israel, right? May all those who are held in captivity be returned, and may we eradicate evil and find peace, right?
Hopefully. Amen.
Amen. All right, take care.